If you're over the age of 50 and you're still funneling your hard-earned money into a regular savings account, you're making one of the biggest financial mistakes that quietly drains the wealth of millions of Americans every single year. It's the same approach that forces so many people to keep working far longer than they want, some even into their 70s and 80s, because they simply can't afford to stop. This isn't about being careless or lazy. It's about following advice that might have worked in your 20s and 30s, but fails dramatically once you pass the half-century mark. Wealthy people learned this a long time ago, and that's why they don't keep their money in the same places the middle class does. What they do instead may go completely against everything you've been taught about safe retirement planning, but the results speak for themselves. I spent more than 15 years studying the habits, decisions, and patterns of high net worth individuals, and in the process I discovered a truth that shocked me. The wealthy don't rely on savings accounts after 50, not because they don't value security, but because they know that a traditional savings account is actually one of the least effective ways to protect and grow wealth at this stage of life. The numbers reveal why. After 50, three silent wealth destroyers work relentlessly against you: inflation, taxation, and time scarcity. Most people don't realize how powerful these forces are until they've already lost years of potential growth. Let's start with inflation. You might think you're doing well if your high-yield savings account is paying 4% interest, but if inflation is running at 3.2%, your real return, what you can actually buy with that money, is only 0.8%. And that's before taxes. This brings us to the second wealth destroyer: taxes. The interest from your savings account is taxed as ordinary income, which means that 0.8% real return shrinks even further, maybe to 0.5% or less, depending on your tax bracket. That's a few $100s a year in true growth on every 100,000 you've saved, barely enough to make any meaningful difference. Meanwhile, your groceries, your healthcare costs, your property taxes, and your utility bills continue to rise faster than your earnings. The third destroyer is time scarcity. At 25, you had decades ahead for compound growth to do the heavy lifting. At 50 or 60, you might only have 15 years before you need to start drawing from your investments. That drastically reduces the benefit of slow, safe growth because the clock is no longer on your side. You need your money working harder in a shorter period. And that's something a savings account simply cannot do. I've seen this play out countless times. Take Robert, a 54-year-old engineer from Michigan. He had $350,000 spread across certificates of deposit earning 3.5%. He felt secure because his principal was guaranteed, but after inflation and taxes, his actual growth was almost non-existent. Over 5 years, his purchasing power fell by nearly $20,000. He thought he was playing it safe, but in reality, his savings were quietly shrinking. Wealthy individuals understand this problem and refuse to let it happen. They don't park their money. They put it into motion. This is what I call the wealth velocity principle. Idle money loses value, while money in motion gains value. The wealthy think of every dollar as a soldier, and soldiers who stay in camp win no battles. They deploy their dollars into income-producing and appreciating assets that outpace inflation and deliver real after-tax returns. For some, that means investing in dividend growth companies with decades-long histories of increasing payouts. For others, it might involve medical REITs, real estate investment trusts focused on healthcare facilities, which benefit from an aging population and provide both steady yields of 6 to 8% and the potential for long-term appreciation. Sometimes wealthy people even take on debt intentionally. That might sound reckless, but it's calculated. They might borrow at 6% to invest in something returning 8 to 12%, pocketing the difference as profit. For example, a home equity line of credit could be used to buy dividend aristocrats yielding 4% with historical growth of 8% annually, creating both income and appreciation, while in some cases allowing the interest to be tax deductible. They also make use of tax-advantaged strategies that become especially valuable after 50. This can include backdoor Roth conversions, mega backdoor Roths, or even cash balance pension plans for business owners, all of which shelter large sums from taxes while keeping the funds invested for growth. These are strategies most middle-class savers either haven't heard of or dismiss as too complex. But wealthy people know they can make an enormous difference in both growth and tax savings over time. The mindset is what really separates the wealthy from everyone else. Middle-class savers view money as something to protect, to store, to keep from disappearing. Wealthy individuals view money as a tool, even as ammunition. It has no value if it's not being used. Many people over 50 become overly cautious because they believe they can't afford a mistake. But being too cautious can be its own mistake, allowing inflation and taxes to quietly dismantle your financial security. Wealthy people still take precautions, but they pair those precautions with calculated, higher conviction moves that create momentum in their portfolios. I worked with a couple in their mid-50s who had saved $480,000 over 30 years, mostly in savings accounts and CDs earning around 3.8%. On paper, it looks safe, but after inflation and taxes, they were earning less than 1% in real terms. Once they understood the hidden danger, they began repositioning their savings into dividend growth stocks and income-generating real estate. In just 3 years, their investment income doubled, and their net worth climbed by more than $100,000, all without dramatically increasing their risk. For those who aren't wealthy yet, there's a method I call the wealth transition protocol. First, shift about 50 to 60% of your current savings into dividend growth stocks with proven track records. Companies like Coca-Cola, Johnson & Johnson, Microsoft, and Walmart, which offer consistent income and steady appreciation. Next, over the course of a year, move 20 to 30% of your capital into real estate investments that produce reliable cash flow, such as healthcare or senior living REITs. Finally, once that foundation is in place, use low-cost debt to acquire even more income-producing assets, creating a flywheel of cash flow and growth. Consider David, a 53-year-old sales manager who borrowed $75,000 against his home at 5.8% interest. He invested the money in dividend stocks and rates, yielding an average of 9.2% annually. 4 years later, his $75,000 had grown to over $115,000. The investment income covered his loan payments, and he had extra cash left over each year. Or take Carol, a 52-year-old teacher with $200,000 in CDs earning 4%. Once she realized her true return after inflation and taxes was only about 0.5%, she reallocated $120,000 into Dividend Aristocrats, $50,000 into medical REITs, and kept $30,000 liquid for emergencies. Within 3 years, her annual income rose from $8,000 to $14,600, and by year 5 it reached $19,200. Her portfolio value climbed to over $340,000, and much of her living expenses are now covered by passive income. Some people hear these stories and immediately think, that's too risky for me. But here's the truth. The greatest risk for someone over 50 is keeping money in a place where it's guaranteed to lose to inflation. That's what I call silent poverty, the slow, invisible decline in your purchasing power that eventually forces you to lower your standard of living. Wealthy individuals understand that market downturns are temporary, but the damage from inaction is permanent. They protect themselves by diversifying income sources, keeping reserves for buying opportunities, and avoiding panic selling during volatility. Savings accounts can't offer those protections. They only shrink quietly as prices rise around you. When you're over 50, time is the most limited resource you have. Every month that your money sits idle is a month of potential compounding you can never get back. The wealthy know this, which is why they focus on strategic, decisive moves rather than waiting for the perfect moment. That perfect moment rarely comes, and hesitation costs far more than calculated action. This isn't about gambling with your retirement. It's about refusing to let your future be eaten away in silence. Now that you know why the rich don't save after 50, you have a choice. Keep doing what the majority does and hope it's enough. Or take a page from the wealthy and put your money to work before it's too late.